My guest is here. I want to bring him on because there's a lot to talk about in this. Hamza, it has been a long time, my man. How are you doing today? You doing all right?
Yes, I'm well. How about yourself?
I am making it. I'm doing well. I'm alive. I'm kicking. Still here on this planet. I really appreciate you joining me for the story. You were the first person I thought about when I saw this. My first thought was, "What the hell?" That was my first thought. These are two nuclear powers. Pakistan and India have been at odds for a while, but it chilled out a bit. And just for the audience, Hamza Salam, he's a Pakistani journalist. He is founder and editor of Pakistan Daily and former reporter for Pakistan's The News International. Hamza, I gave them a primer on what was taking place in regards to the number of people that were killed. Everybody except for one, all of them were Indian. There was one Nepali, and I want to start from there. Before I get into some of the other parts, tell me about this region. The CNN kind of gave this basic primer that you can only reach the area on horseback. It's kind of a sightseeing destination. And apparently a terrorist group claimed responsibility for it, for the attack. Go from there and give us it right here, Kashmir Resistance, also known as the Resistance Front, claim responsibility for the attack. What do we know about this so far?
Well, the attack happened in Pahalgam, which is part of Indian occupied Kashmir. So the responsibility for the security of the citizens rested with the Indian government and the Indian security forces. So unknown gunmen, they came and they killed tourists in what appears to be a targeted terrorist attack in which tourists and civilians were the target. And the entire world, including Pakistan, condemned this atrocity because civilians, wherever they die, whether they are in India or in Pakistan, it is a tragedy. So what we have to understand is that Kashmir is divided into two parts. One is occupied by the Indian forces, and the other, in Pakistan, it's called Azad Jammu and Kashmir or Independent Jammu and Kashmir. It has quasi autonomy. It's controlled by Pakistan, but it has its own Supreme Court. It has its own parliament. It has its own president. So it has much more autonomy in Pakistan. The Pakistani administered Kashmir has much more autonomy than the Indian occupied Kashmir. In Indian occupied Kashmir, there's a lot of human rights violations. Muslims have been profiled and targeted. There's been internet disruptions. And overall, there has been a sense of animosity between the local population and the occupying forces. So this attack has to be looked at in this context because this is not the first time that we have seen terrorism and militancy in Kashmir. Yes, this is a very deadly attack and it requires the world's attention. However, this is not the first attack, and there have been sporadic attacks here and there in Indian occupied Kashmir. I think, the biggest dynamic which is in play is the disconnect between the Indian security forces and the local population. So I think the world needs to understand the exact dynamic of this region to understand the context of this attack.
I think if I assume the position of the Indian government for a moment, I think their point of view is, well, this was a Pakistani group that did this. There were so many people that were killed, like 26. And on top of that, they associate the group with the Pakistani government. So they're not looking at this as this is an independent terrorist group. They're looking at it as Pakistan has some relation to that terrorist group. And so Pakistan holds some level of responsibility for the people that were killed. Give me your take on that. Because I want to show you a video after you give me your take on this.
Yes, the Indian government is claiming this, but if you put the map of Kashmir right now, the one which is controlled by Pakistan and the one which is controlled by India, this attack in Pahalgam is hundreds of kilometers away from Pakistani Kashmir, from Azad Jammu and Kashmir. So how was it possible that militants or terrorists from Pakistan traveled hundreds of kilometers in a region where there are hundreds of thousands of Indian security forces, and they conducted this attack and then they came back to Pakistan? I think logistically and militarily, this is not possible. And if it is possible, and if it indeed happened that Pakistan was behind this, I think this would be the largest intelligence failure in the history of perhaps military history. And I think this would raise alarm bells across the entire militaries in the region, that how could militants travel hundreds of kilometers away? But I think that India is deflecting responsibility, and India has been unable to keep peace in the region, and now it is putting the blame of its own failures on Pakistan's shoulders, because it is extremely implausible, given the border, given the circumstances, given how many security checkpoints there are in Indian occupied Kashmir. You know, there is one soldier for seven civilians in Indian occupied Kashmir. So it
Really?
is just not possible for Pakistan to have any direct involvement. But yes, certain security analysts have said or claimed that Pakistan may have provided some moral support or some financial support, but this is all just hearsay. There is no evidence to suggest any Pakistani involvement, and if there is evidence, I think it should come out in the media, so that analysts and journalists and other people can debate on it, and other countries perhaps should also be given evidence of Pakistan's involvement if there is any such evidence.
I'm glad you said that because that falls into the video that I want to show. So this gentleman was on Sky News. I believe it's Sky News. Listen to what he says here, because what he's insinuating is he thinks
Yes.
it's a false flag. He's effectively saying, look, we had nothing to do with it. We think India might have staged this. And if they did, I guess my question will be, why? Why would India stage an event that kills over 20 people? Like, I'm just going to play this. Hopefully they don't shut my video down for trying to play this, but I'm going to try to play it.
Came from Delhi was not really surprising for us. We could make out that this whole thing was staged to create some sort of crisis in the region, particularly for us.
I'm just going to have to pick.
Why would they stage that? Like when I saw that, my first thought was, why would they do that? What would be the motivation for India to stage a false flag that kills 20 people? Like, what is the thinking in this? Because I don't think you would say that just randomly. And as you pointed out, how are they going to run, get on horseback through all of these checkpoints, hundreds of miles, etc.? Why do you think, or why does he think this was a staged event?
Yes, the video you played was from the defense minister of Pakistan. And yes, there are certain circles in Islamabad which are analyzing whether this attack was a false flag operation. So there are some facts which suggest that it could have been staged. And the primary reason, I think, is the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the attack. So till now, the attackers have not been caught. I think this is something which should ring alarm bells. And while the attack was going on, there was no response from the Indian forces. The Indian base was nearby. It could have sent some reinforcements to challenge the attackers. The ease with which these terrorists were able to conduct this operation does raise eyebrows. And now for the motivations of this. I think timing is very important in these affairs. J.D. Vance, American vice president, was visiting India. This attack coincided with this visit. So, there are certain people in Islamabad and in other global capitals, in Beijing, in London, in Washington, who are perhaps analyzing that, the timing is pretty curious about this attack.
Mhm.
And also the way with which Indian media immediately pinned the blame on Pakistan. I think that India, perhaps I'm not claiming that this is the case, but it could be argued that India wanted to open a front with Pakistan. It wanted American attention on this region, which is why perhaps they conducted a false flag operation against their own citizens. And they wanted to deteriorate relations with Pakistan, because even earlier in 2019, in the previous skirmishes between India and Pakistan, where they had an aerial dogfight, we saw the same pattern, that India blamed Pakistan for an attack which happened in Indian occupied Kashmir, and immediately we see an aerial dogfight, and Pakistan captured Indian wing commander Abhinandan, which Pakistan released as a gesture of goodwill. So we've all been there. We've fought wars before. We fought a war in 1965. We fought a war in 1971. Now these two countries are nuclear powers.
Yeah.
So the chessboard is played in a way that I could argue that perhaps it suits India's interests to open another front against Pakistan, just as there's a new administration in Washington. So I think India has a lot of motivations and the capability to conduct a false flag operation.
Wow, that is a big statement. Because again, we're talking about Indian citizens being used as a way to effectively provoke a war for all intents and purposes. And to get to that for a moment, so India has taken several actions. They closed the border. Apparently, they closed airspace. But one of the things they also did was close one of the waterways that's going to Pakistan. Pakistan has, I'll just read it. It says, Pakistan says any attempt to stop or divert water flow belonging to Pakistan as per Indus Water Treaty will be considered an act of war and responded with full force military across the complete spectrum of national powers. They've been apparently moving weapons systems to the border. That is a big deal. That is a very big deal. So what is going on with this? What is the movements that India and Pakistan are making in response to, I guess, this event?
Well, I think things are moving upwards in the escalation ladder, and the Indus Water Treaty was brokered by the World Bank. So it has a very strong international backing, and India cannot just unilaterally opt out of this agreement. There are a lot of international players who are involved, and it will take years, if not decades, for India to effectively block certain parts of Pakistan's water access. What they can do is limit or restrict cooperation. They can restrict data sharing. They can stop holding joint meetings in regards to the rivers, in regards to the experts, which sometimes they interact and they share information. So this is something India can do. But I think all of these actions show India's intent. Till now, till the 25th of April 2025, New Delhi has not provided an iota of evidence of Pakistani involvement in this attack. Yet it has taken a lot of aggressive action against Islamabad, and totally unprovoked, I would say, totally unwarranted, unmerited, which perhaps shows how there was a plan to create another front against Pakistan, because this issue could have been solved diplomatically. And there have been attacks in Pakistan as well. There has been a Jafar Express attack in the train where over 30 Pakistani civilians died. And Pakistan has also alleged Indian involvement, but Pakistan did not respond in kind the way New Delhi did. And it just happened, the Jafar Express attack happened very recently. In fact, Pakistan has also, a few years back, caught an Indian intelligence officer in Balochistan who has confessed of planning terror attacks in Balochistan. And yet Pakistan has not taken such steps. So I think that Islamabad is emerging as a beacon of peace and is behaving as a responsible actor in the region. But in contrast, New Delhi is emerging as a warmonger and, being too inclined towards warfare. So yes, while it is true that New Delhi has greater military arsenal, it has a bigger military, it has a better economy. Perhaps in terms of total conventional war, India does have the advantage. But we must remember, the global community must remember that these are nuclear powers. And if a nuclear conflict happens, it will spill over the entire world. So the world must take caution.
I guess my main question is why would they want a war with Pakistan? I mean, as you pointed out, there were multiple wars. Also, as you pointed out, these are two nuclear powers. So worst come to worst, if one loses, the nuclear capacity always comes into play. Why do you think they're motivated in this sense? Like, meaning, assume you're right for the moment, and assuming this was a false flag because India wanted to provoke a war, and they used this as a justification to do it. What would be the rationale? I mean, J.D. Vance coming is interesting, But a war is larger than just JD Vance being there. I mean, is it the thought that the US is going to be on their side in that war? Like, what is the rationale for it? For the longest time, Pakistani's military has worked closely with the United States. So, what would be the reason that Narendra Modi or whoever is in the military in regards to India would want to initiate just the exchange in this way?
Well, I think the biggest motivation would be to gain more territory in Kashmir. And now Pakistan has also signaled that it may opt out of the Shimla Agreement, which recognizes the line of control between these two nations. So now, if these things happen and both nations do not recognize this border, it is possible that both nations try to take territory of the other. And
Yeah.
perhaps India is motivated uh, by uh, by a strategy, by a military tactic in which it thinks that they may perhaps gain some territory. But we've been involved with Pakistani security circles, especially the ones who form policy, and Pakistan Daily, our news outlet, has an understanding that Pakistan's policy in such a conflict is quid pro quo plus. So the response will not just be equal, but it will be slightly more than what India does. So I think New Delhi is walking on a very thin line, and I think the situation is extremely precarious. It could potentially escalate into World War III if the situation is not controlled. And yes, while Pakistan has a very deep relationship with the United States, India has also emerged as a greater regional power than Pakistan. India has more leverage than Pakistan in this region. And perhaps many countries, including the United States, may think that it is more beneficial to side more with India than with Pakistan. But then there's China in the region, which is also threatened by India's rise, and it is also Pakistan's neighbor. So I think that diplomacy is the need of the hour. I think that the way a Hindu nationalist government has been dictating foreign policy and military policy in India has already significantly damaged Indian interests. We've seen India kill certain Khalistani leaders in North America. In Canada, we've seen a planning of New Delhi to kill somebody in the US as well. So I think that there needs to be more diplomacy and less military outcomes in this regard.
I guess last question. If you had to take a crystal ball and prognosticate, do you think there would be some kind of diplomatic resolution to this before? Well, there already been skirmishes, but do you think there'll be a diplomatic solution to this?
Well, I think ultimately, no matter how far this goes on the escalation ladder, yes, diplomacy will win. Diplomacy has ultimately been the arbitrator of all conflicts, whether it was a great war between multiple nations or between these two nations. So, yes, I think ultimately, I don't know when, but ultimately, diplomacy will rule the roost. And
Mhm.
ultimately, the security hawks on both sides will have to sit on the table. But yes, sometimes military gains and losses and diplomacy goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
So sometimes you take two steps forward, one steps back. It is unclear when diplomacy will come to dominate this conflict, but ultimately, and I think most probably, and we've also used artificial intelligence in our analysis, which we do in our news outlets and in our other work. So even AI predicts that most probably there will be a diplomatic outcome, and there will not be a conventional war between these two nuclear armed neighbors. So far there have been no airstrikes, or there has not been too much heat on the line of control, which signals that till now 72 hours have passed and the situation is largely under control. So I do hope that sane minds prevail, and this war mongering ends, because we're talking about the lives of almost 2 billion people in these two countries. So we hope, and we can analyze and predict to a certain extent that yes, diplomacy will win and warmongering will lose.
From your mouth to God's ears. Hamza, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate this breakdown. I saw the story and I was like, what the hell is happening here? These are, and my first thought was these are two nuclear powers. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Like, you typically try to avoid like these kind of direct attacks or these direct fights between nuclear powers. So thank you for this. I appreciate it. I believe my audience appreciates it. It's a great rundown. Thank you. You have a fantastic day, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. And you
And
too. Goodbye.
by the way,
Yeah,
just for the audience, Hamza Salam, he is a Pakistani journalist. He is founder and author of the Pakistan Daily and former reporter for Pakistan's The News International. Check him out. By the way, well, I just noted where people can find you, but from a social media standpoint, where can people find you?
well, you can find us on Twitter at the Park Daily, on Instagram at the Park Daily, and you can also follow me on Twitter. It's Hamza Salam, also on Instagram with the same name. So do follow us.
Thank you, my man. You be safe. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. All right. That is a great rundown of what is taking place. I hope he's right. There are two nuclear powers. You can imagine that will go bad very fast if it continues.